On the morning of June 16th, 2005, 27-year-old Murugan Kanyapan was making his usual rounds as a cleaner along the banks of the Kallang River, Singapore. His job was straightforward: pick up trash, clear the debris, keep the area clean. Nothing out of the ordinary. As he walked along the riverbank, his eyes landed on a large, waterlogged cardboard box, sealed tightly with masking tape and half submerged in the mud. At first, he dismissed it as just another piece of trash. He reached down, intending to haul it away, but the moment he tried to lift it, something felt off. The box was heavier than expected, and the water damage had weakened it. It was barely holding together. Then, it gave way in his hands. A plastic bag tumbled out, wet and bloated from the river. Through the thin plastic, he could make out what looked like raw meat, swollen and pale. For a moment, he thought it was just discarded food. But then, Murugan's breath hitched. His hands trembled as he staggered back. Taking in the details, he saw pale flesh, smooth skin, and a jagged, unnatural cut. The lower half of a human body lay before him, severed cleanly at the waist and the knees. Yet, something was even more unsettling. There was no stench of decay, no signs of decomposition. The skin looked fresh, eerily intact, as if this person had been alive just hours ago. A chill crept up his spine. With fingers slick from river water, he fumbled for his phone. You're listening to Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast produced by One Up Media. This episode may contain sensitive details and graphic imagery. Listener discretion is advised. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene. Officers taped off the area, and forensic teams moved in. The discovery of a severed torso was disturbing enough, but it was just one part of a larger mystery. Where was the rest of the body? To find out, authorities expanded their investigation, setting up a 2-kilometer search radius around the Kallang River. Special operations officers combed the banks, while the police coast guard sent boats into the water, scanning the currents for anything that might surface. Unfortunately, the investigation was filled with challenges. At first, investigators considered the possibility that the remains had drifted into Singapore's waters from elsewhere. After all, hundreds of ships pass through the Singapore Strait every day, so there was a high chance that the body was dumped at sea and carried inland by the currents. If that were the case, identifying the victim would be nearly impossible. Another challenge was the possibility that the missing body parts had been wrapped in plastic bags or cardboard, just like the first discovery. If that was the case, the strong currents could have carried them miles away, making them even harder to find. But then, a breakthrough. About 200 meters downstream, officers spotted something partially submerged in the water, a sealed red and white cardboard box. Inside the box, sealed within layers of torn newspaper and plastic, was the upper torso of a woman. Her arms were still attached, resting stiffly at her sides, her hands curled unnaturally inward. The severed edges of her neck were cleanly sliced, as if by a sharp, heavy blade. There was no ragged tearing, no jagged wounds, just a smooth, deliberate cut where her head should have been. Though both parts of the body had been submerged in the water, the victim's skin remained eerily intact. There were few signs of bloating or decomposition, and little evidence that she had been dead for long. There was something about how the body was packaged that felt almost methodical. The torso had been carefully folded into the plastic bag, its edges tucked in, as if someone had taken the time to neatly arrange the remains. But who was this woman? Where was the rest of her? And what did she do to deserve such a gruesome fate? The recovered body parts were swiftly transported to a forensics lab, where investigators began piecing together the mystery. One of their first tasks was to determine whether the victim had originated from outside Singapore, perhaps from a passing vessel or an offshore boat. But that theory quickly began to crumble. The biggest clue came from one of the boxes she was found in. The upper torso had been found inside a red and white printer box, one originally used to package a Canon printer. Investigators traced the serial number and confirmed that this specific model had been intended for sale in Singapore. Whoever had placed the body inside hadn't brought the box from overseas. They had obtained it locally. But that wasn't the only clue. The body parts had been wrapped in newspaper that was printed locally, pages from a Singaporean Chinese publication. This revelation eliminated the theory that the remains had drifted in from the open sea. Whatever had happened to the victim had almost certainly taken place within Singapore's borders. Meanwhile, forensic specialists conducted multiple DNA tests to confirm whether both body parts belonged to the same person. They analyzed tissue samples, cross-checked genetic markers, and compared results with every available database. The results left no doubt. The torso and lower half were a match. Now, only one question remained: her identity. To solve this, authorities in Singapore carefully lifted fingerprints from the victim's hands and ran them through an extensive fingerprint database. Every scan was cross-checked against thousands of records. Then, a match. The victim was 22-year-old Liu Hong Mei. With the victim's identity confirmed, investigators turned their focus to understanding who Liu Hong Mei was, and more importantly, what happened to her. Liu Hong Mei was a 22-year-old Chinese national from Changchun, China. She had come to Singapore in 2003 in search of better job opportunities, and according to a work permit, was employed at a Gear Systems Singapore, a circuit board manufacturing company in Serangoon North. Everyone who knew Hong Mei had nothing but good things to say. She was described as cheerful, hardworking, and well-liked among her peers. No one could recall her having any conflicts at work, and there was no indication that she had any enemies. But then, police uncovered something intriguing. They requested access to a personal locker at the company, hoping to find anything that could offer insight into her life. Inside, tucked between some documents and personal belongings, they uncovered something unexpected: a note from the company's HR department. It was an official reprimand, a warning letter. According to the document, complaints had been lodged against Hong Mei over an inappropriate relationship with her supervisor, a man named Leong Siu Cho. With this revelation, police now had a new suspect. They sought out Leong Siu Cho for questioning, but they were careful. The police didn't reveal what they knew, nor did they mention anything about Hong Mei's fate. If he had truly done something wrong, perhaps he would reveal it himself. At 51 years old, Leong Siu Cho was the picture of an ordinary Singaporean worker, a husband, a father of 3, and a factory supervisor at a Gear Systems since 1997. On the surface, his connection with 22-year-old Liu Hong Mei seemed like nothing more than a senior guiding a younger employee. But beneath that surface, there was more. Leong had taken a special interest in Hong Mei from the start. She was young, bright, and full of energy. Interestingly, Hong Mei had received 2 promotions within a short time period at the company, which sparked a wave of quiet murmurs among her colleagues about favoritism. Before long, the rumors were confirmed. The employee and supervisor were having an affair. Over time, their relationship became increasingly bold. No longer confined to stolen glances, they were caught kissing and hugging at work. earning them both a formal warning from management. But despite the warning, they continued seeing each other. A young woman searching for connection in a foreign land, and an older man craving something beyond the monotony of his predictable life. But now, sitting across from investigators, Leong showed no emotion. His face was stiff, his tone measured. On the surface, he appeared calm, but the officers noticed something else. Something wasn't right. They started with a simple question: his relationship with Liu Hong Mei. Immediately, Leong grew defensive. His posture stiffened, his tone sharpened. He dismissed the idea outright, insisting that he was a family man with a wife and children, that he had no such affair. Then they brought up the letter of reprimand. His company had formally warned him about an inappropriate relationship with Hong Mei. Leong exhaled sharply, brushing it off. He insisted that the incident had been blown out of proportion. The only reason he had been seen with Hong Mei that day was because it was her birthday. That was all. Nothing more. But as he spoke, one of the officers noticed something. Leong's hands, resting on the table, bore several scuff marks, small abrasions along his fingers and knuckles. Casually, the officer asked about them. Leong's jaw tightened. His fingers curled slightly as he muttered that it was nothing. The officer leaned in, asking him to show his hands. Leong hesitated. A brief pause. Then, reluctantly, he turned them over. His fingers twitched, and his entire hand trembled. The next step was Leong's home. When officers requested to conduct a search, he didn't hesitate. He agreed. As they moved through the apartment, they began to uncover a series of unsettling clues. In his living room, they found a stack of Chinese newspapers, the exact same publication as the ones used to wrap Hong Mei's body parts. In his kitchen cupboards, they discovered plastic bags, identical to the ones used to bag the remains. And then, in the kitchen itself, they found something even more disturbing: a meat cleaver with several chips on the blade, damaged in a way that was consistent with hacking through bone. Forensic experts initially theorized that if Leong was responsible for the murder, the most likely place for the dismemberment would have been the bathroom. It made the most sense. A space designed for easy cleaning, where blood could be quickly washed away down the drain. But when they stepped inside, the bathroom was spotless. There wasn't a drop of blood anywhere. If the bathroom was spotless, where did the dismemberment take place? And more importantly, was Leong even guilty? Investigators had their suspicions, and the evidence so far painted a damning picture. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. They needed proof, hard evidence that could directly tie Leong to the crime. And soon, they would get it. Back at the station, police brought Leong in for questioning again, and hour after hour, the walls began to close in. After close to 10 hours in custody, Leong confessed. He admitted to killing Liu Hong Mei. But according to him, it wasn't murder. He claimed that she had wanted to die. It was, he told police, a lover's suicide pact. He insisted that Hong Mei had willingly allowed him to strangle her first, proving her sincerity. But when it was his turn to follow through, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he panicked and did what he thought he had to do to cover it up. According to Inspector Roy Lim, the lead investigator handling the interrogation, neither he nor his team believed a single word of his story. Just 3 days after Liu's remains were found, Leong Siu-Chaw was formally charged with murder. If convicted, his fate was all but sealed. The death penalty awaited him. But there were a few critical questions that remained. What was the real motive behind her murder? And more importantly, where were the rest of her remains? When a crime like this happens, a brutal killing, a body dismembered, the remains scattered across the city, one question comes to mind. Why? A crime like this must have been driven by rage, obsession, passion. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it was revenge. But the truth? It was none of those things. From the moment Leong Siu-cho was taken into custody, investigators knew they weren't getting the full story. His confession was full of contradictions. First, he claimed there had never been a relationship between him and Liu Hong Mei. Then, he admitted to the affair, but only after police confronted him with the evidence. And when it came to the murder itself, Leong described it as a lover's suicide pact, one where she had supposedly let him strangle her first. But when it was his turn, he couldn't go through with it. To investigators, the story made no sense. If this was truly a crime of love, why did he go to such great lengths to hide her body? And more importantly, if he truly cared about her, why did his actions tell a different story? As police dug deeper, they found something chilling. This murder wasn't about love at all. It was all about money. Back at Leong Siu-cho's apartment, Inspector Roy Lim carefully examined the bathroom, searching for any trace of evidence. But something immediately stood out. The space was spotless. No stains, no lingering smell of blood. Nothing. Which didn't make sense. If a body had been chopped up here, there should have been blood everywhere. It would have seeped into the grout, splattered onto the walls, clung to every surface. But at first glance, the bathroom was immaculately clean. As Inspector Lim stood there, scanning the area, something nagged at him, a memory from a case report he had read years ago. Over a decade earlier, in another Singapore murder case, British serial killer John Martin Scripps had lured a South African tourist to his hotel room, killed him, and dismembered the body in the bathroom. When police arrived, they were met with the same eerie scene, a crime scene too clean, no visible blood, no obvious signs of violence. But Lim's superior at the time had taken a closer look. And under the sink, hidden from plain sight, they found it, a single bloodstain. And now, standing in Leong's bathroom, Inspector Lim wondered, had Leong made the same mistake? Remembering this, Lim decided to check under the sink, but found nothing. It wasn't until he crouched lower, inspecting beneath the toilet bowl, that he spotted it, a small red stain. Forensic tests later confirmed what he already suspected. It was blood, and it was a 100% match to Liu Hong Mei. On June 18, 2005, just 3 days after Liu Hong Mei's remains were discovered, 50-year-old Leong Siu-cho was officially charged with murder. At the time of his arrest, Leong's wife and eldest daughter were on a holiday in Thailand. The news of his arrest shattered the family, forcing them to abruptly end their trip and return to Singapore. There, they reunited with Leong's 2 younger children, his son and youngest daughter, as they braced for what was to come. Together, they attended his first court hearing, watching as the man they knew as a husband and father stood accused of an unthinkable crime. While the case had already dominated headlines locally, it also made extensive news coverage in China, particularly in Liu Hong Mei's hometown. For those who had known her, the friends, neighbors, and extended family members back in China, the gruesome details of her death were too painful to comprehend. But the hardest part was telling her parents. Reports state that those who were close to the family couldn't even bring themselves to share the truth. The idea of Liu's mother and father learning that their daughter had not only been murdered, but dismembered and discarded like trash was simply too much to bear. It's unclear how long Liu Hong Mei's parents were kept in the dark, or how long those around them tried to shield them from the brutal truth. But a tragedy of this scale couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, The reality of what had happened to their daughter would reach them, and when it does, it would be nothing short of devastating. By now, it was clear Liu Hong Mei had died a horrific death at the hands of Leong Siu Cho. But there were still two crucial questions left unanswered. Why? And more importantly, how? To uncover the full truth, investigators needed one thing first: the rest of her body. After Leong's arrest, a 30-member special operations team combed through the banks and dense undergrowth surrounding the Kallang River, scouring every possible hiding place. Meanwhile, the police Coast Guard deployed patrol boats, navigating the river's currents and tracing its path all the way to the open sea. If the rest of her body parts had been dumped into the water, there was a chance they had already drifted far beyond Singapore's shores. In response, investigators consulted the Singapore Meteorological Service to analyze the river's current patterns over the past few days. They needed to know where the water had been flowing and if something had been thrown into the river at a specific location, where it would likely end up after several days. Using weather data and current patterns, experts provided possible trajectories, helping police determine where to focus their search before it was too late. But there was another concern. It was possible that other cleaners at the pier had unknowingly collected the remains and tossed them into the trash without a second thought. If that had happened, the outcome would be far worse, because by now, the rubbish would have already been incinerated. With time slipping away, a team of investigators rushed to the Tuas incineration plant, hoping to recover any remaining body parts before they were permanently destroyed. They had learned that trash from the Singapore River was collected and transported to Tuas for incineration every few days. And fortunately, the timing aligned perfectly. Leong had disposed of the remains just before his arrest, meaning they could have already been swept up and sent for disposal. For the next 10 hours, officers sifted through piles of garbage, searching for anything that could lead them to Liu Hong Mei's missing remains. Then, buried among the waste, they found it. A yellow plastic bag, tightly wrapped in newspaper. Inside was a decomposed human head. Nearby, they also discovered a pair of severed legs. The head was in such an advanced state of decay that visual identification was impossible. But forensic pathologist Dr. Teo Eng Sui was able to confirm the victim's identity through a malformed tooth in her mouth cavity, identical to the one seen in some of Liu Hong Mei's photographs. With most of Liu Hong Mei's body recovered, pathologists were finally able to confirm what investigators had suspected all along. She had been strangled to death. The bruising on her neck was consistent with ligature strangulation, a form of asphyxiation where pressure is applied using an object rather than bare hands. Unlike manual strangulation, which leaves distinct finger marks, ligature strangulation often results in a deep, uniform bruise around the neck. And to investigators, the most likely cause was clear: the towel recovered from Leong's apartment. But while this proved how she died, it still didn't explain why. Leong had insisted it was a lover's suicide pact, that Liu had willingly let him take her life. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something that made his story fall apart completely. Two days before she died, Liu Hong Mei had walked into a police station and filed a report. Her ATM card had been stolen, and whoever had taken it had been draining her savings little by little across multiple locations in Singapore. In total, she had lost $2,000, nearly everything she had worked for. To investigators, this wasn't just a theft. It could be the key to understanding why someone wanted her dead. They turned to the ATM surveillance footage, combing through clip after clip. Each time, the same figure appeared, a slim man wearing a cap and hoodie, withdrawing cash from her account. And the moment they saw his face, there was no doubt. It was Leong Siu Chor. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn when police discovered that Leong Siu Chor had an identical twin brother living in Singapore. This raised a rather disturbing question. What if they accused the wrong twin? Forensic pathologist Dr. Teo Eng Sui explained that in cases involving identical twins, DNA evidence alone wouldn't be enough to determine the killer. Since identical twins share the same DNA, if their genetic material was found at a crime scene, it would be nearly impossible to distinguish between them. Inspector Roy Lim himself even wondered if Leong was covering for his twin brother, as there was a small chance that his brother was the true culprit behind this case. But that theory was quickly ruled out. Reports state that Leong's twin brother had a solid alibi for the days leading up to the murder and the day Liu was killed. There was also no evidence that he had ever met Liu Hong Mei. That meant there was only one possibility. The man withdrawing money from her account, the man caught on ATM surveillance, was Leong Siu Chor. When confronted with the evidence, Leong brushed it off, insisting that he and Liu often played pranks with each other's ATM cards and that he had already returned the money. But police found no proof of this. Not in his home, not in Liu's. And the more they investigated, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a prank. It was theft. "10 days after his arrest, Leong finally broke. He retracted his earlier statements and told the police what really happened. On June 13, 2005, Leong and Liu Hong Mei had checked into a hotel room for one of their usual lovemaking meetups. After they were intimate, Liu went to take a bath. While she was in the bathroom, Leong saw an opportunity. He quietly rummaged through her wallet, took her ATM card, and pocketed it. Once they left the hotel, Leong used her money to go on a shopping spree. It wasn't long before Liu realized something was wrong. Her ATM card was missing, and when she checked her account, so was her money. Panicked, she reported the theft to the police and was advised to visit the bank for further checks. She was scheduled to go on June 15, 2005. But when Leong found out about this, fear set in. If Hong Mei were to see the CCTV footage from the ATMs, she would recognize him immediately. And if she reported him, it wouldn't just mean theft charges. It would mean his secret affair exposed, his reputation shattered. If the truth came out, he could lose everything: his job, his family, the respect of those around him. And so, on the morning of June 15, 2005, just hours before Liu was supposed to go to the bank, Leong made a decision. He lured her to his apartment. The moment the murder was done, panic swelled in Leong's chest. The thought of confessing, of facing a death sentence, was unthinkable. There was only one way out. She couldn't be found. His gaze drifted to the kitchen, where a meat cleaver and rubber mallet sat within reach. Dragging her corpse to the bathroom, he set the cleaver against her joints and, one by one, hammered down with the mallet, severing bone from flesh. The task was brutal, far more difficult than he had anticipated, but eventually, he had reduced Liu Hong Mei to 7 different pieces. He wrapped each one carefully in plastic bags and cardboard boxes, sealing them. With the body dealt with, he turned to the bathroom. Every inch had to be scrubbed, every trace of blood erased. Taking his son's bicycle, Leong set out on the first trip, disposing of her feet, shoes, and personal belongings in separate locations before returning home for the rest. Then he took a cab to Kallang River, where he dumped her torso and head. By 5 p.m., Leong Xiuchor was back home, and by 7 p.m., he was at work for his usual night shift. On May 3, 2006, nearly 11 months after his arrest, 51-year-old Leong Xiuchor finally stood trial in Singapore's High Court for the murder of Liu Hong Mei. However, as he took the stand, he changed his story. He claimed the police had coerced his confession, specifically accusing Inspector Roy Lim of manipulating him. According to Leong, Inspector Lim had treated him kindly, even buying him Chinese herbal tea to earn his trust. He insisted that this false sense of security had pressured him into making statements that painted him in a worse light. Statements he now claimed were designed to strengthen the murder charge against him. But the evidence told a different story. Inspector Lim denied the allegation outright. He explained that a full week after Leong had already confessed, Leong mentioned feeling unwell, prompting Lim to go to Smith Street in Chinatown to buy him 2 bottles of herbal tea. To prove this, Lim presented his notebook, where he had recorded the sequence of events in detail, showing that the tea was purchased only after Leong had admitted to the murder, not before, as Leong had claimed. With this, the judge ruled that Leong's confession remained admissible as evidence, and his attempt to shift blame onto Inspector Lim was nothing more than a desperate ploy to escape the noose. Additionally, ATM security footage captured Leong withdrawing money from Hong Mei's account just days before her death. This wasn't a tragic suicide pact as he had claimed. It was theft, followed by a calculated attempt to cover up his crime. After 16 days, the judge delivered his verdict. This was no crime of passion. It was murder, driven by greed and self-preservation. Leong stole her savings, then stole her life to keep his crime hidden. The dismemberment of her body showed not a grieving lover, but a man determined to erase his mistake. In his final words, the judge made a chilling comparison, saying, "The accused stole the deceased's heart, then pilfered her card and hard-earned savings, and finally robbed her of her life. He butchered her after her death and took her apart." The deceased's demise in the Kallang flat on the 15th of June 2005 was no spontaneous suicide. It was a horrific homicide. It was a most disgusting and despicable murder. Liu Hong Mei died a very cruel, heartbreaking death. On May 19th, 2006, Leong Xiuchor was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. After nearly a year and a half on death row, he was hanged in Changi Prison. On July 11th, 2005, a funeral was held for Liu Hong Mei after her remains were released. Since her body had been found in pieces, it had to be carefully sewn back together, with wax body parts used as replacements for the ones never recovered. Reports state that her sister and brother could not bring themselves to attend. Liu's coffin was filled with her favorite toys, books, and clothes before being cremated. Her ashes were then sent home to China. Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast, is brought to you by One Up Media. This episode was produced and written by Guangjin, edited by Alex, narrated by Jason, audio experience by Ethan Sam, additional engineering by Ashley from One Up Media. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one.